to the video that came out today on glycine and sleep. So the video that came out today on glycine and sleep is it was from an AMA that I did for my membership program, the CMJ Masterpass. And in that Q&A program, someone asked about the mechanisms by which glycine and salt help with sleep. And so I answered the question, and that person didn't ask about the doses or practically how to apply it or anything like that. And so therefore it wasn't covered in that video, but there was a pretty consistent theme that people who were asking follow-up questions in the comments were asking about what dose and stuff like that to take. So we're going to tackle those follow-up questions today. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And so most of these follow-up questions came on YouTube, although there's a pretty similar one on Instagram. I guess I'll cover the Instagram one first. So Gorgos19 says, what are good dosages and timings for both? 3 grams of glycine and 5 grams of salt 1 hour before sleeping. Just a random guess. And then on YouTube, there are similar questions. So Human Yoda says, and by the way, in the live chat, I'll field any questions about glycine for today. And after I answer some of these questions from the established comments, I'll look at the live chat. And of course, I'm not a medical doctor, so this isn't medical advice. All right, so Human Yoda says, how much glycine is safe and effective? Rob Bogan has a very different question about glycine keeping you up at night, so I'll answer that after I get to dose. Well, I think questions about the dose are the main ones that are on topic here. So first of all, this question is formulated, how much glycine is safe and effective? And so those are two totally different questions. One is, what's the minimal effective dose to help you sleep? And then the other is, how much higher than that could you go while still staying within the safe range? So, first of all, the main study that's of interest is glycine ingestion improves subjective sleep quality in human volunteers correlating with polysomnographic changes. And this is from 2007 by Yamadera et al. In Sleep and Biological Rhythms. And so what they did was they took 3 grams before bedtime. I believe in the methods here, it's going to say that they took it within an hour of they took 3 grams before bed. Pretty sure my memory from this is that, oh yeah, here it is. Oh, they don't write out hour, they say 1H. So they took it within 1 hour before bedtime. So 3 grams before bed. I will comment that I did once have a consulting client who tried 3 grams of glycine before bed and got no benefit from it, and also tried collagen before bed and got no benefit from it. But then when this person tried 6 grams of glycine before bed, it worked great. So I do think there's individual variability. But like the general rule is the minimal effective dose shown in a study is 3 grams taken 1 hour within 1 hour of bedtime. And this used glycine. They took either granule glycine or placebo. And the placebo is a form of malt sugar with the same flavor as glycine. So this was glycine granules, should be relatively the same as glycine powder. But, presumably you could get the benefit from taking gelatin or collagen, but you might not, in that you have competing amino acids that, either the rate of breakdown isn't going to be as quick since you don't need to digest glycine, you just absorb it. But my guess is that the other amino acids in gelatin or collagen might play some role in possibly making it harder for glycine to get into the brain or something like that. But of course, if you want to try gelatin, collagen, or bone broth, then if your bone broth is 10 grams, so collagen's a third glycine. So if your bone broth is 10 grams of protein, which some bone broths are labeled as such, if you make your own, you don't really know, but you can guess. But if it's 10 grams of protein per cup, then you're getting about 3 grams of glycine from roughly 1 cup of bone broth. And then collagen and gelatin are probably going to be somewhere around 15 grams per tablespoon if it's a measured tablespoon. If it's a heaping kitchen big spoon, then it's going to vary, obviously. But same ratio. So a tablespoon should theoretically have somewhere around 5 grams of glycine. Now, the question of how much is safe then is sort of different. So we could look at the various studies that have shown something about a therapeutic effect of glycine and not really shown any adverse effects. And that would be one way of looking at it. Well, actually, really, that's the only way to look at it, because, I mean, I guess the only other way to look at it is, what do you think we got for glycine ancestrally? But anyway, so if we take the first approach, another therapeutic effect of glycine is that it decreases pro-inflammatory cytokines in patients with type 2 diabetes. And in this study, let's see. So it doesn't say in the abstract how much they got, but I do have a write-up of this in an email sequence. Okay, yeah. So this study used 5 grams per day to improve inflammation in people with diabetes. And that's this paper, Glycine Treatment Decreases Pro-Inflammatory Cytokines and Increases Interferon Gamma in Patients with Type 2 Diabetes, in the Journal of Endocrinology Investigations from 2008 by Cruz et al. So it's 5 grams per day. And then this paper, The Metabolic Response to Ingested Glycine by Gannon et al. In American Journal of Clinical Nutrition from 2002. In the abstract, they're telling you that they gave 1 millimole of glycine per kilogram lean body mass, but I translated that in my own notes, and that was between 3.6 to 5.4 grams with a single meal, depending on body weight. And then we also have, so this study's not using glycine powder, it's using gelatin. But this paper is by Shaw et al. And I know Barr, I believe, has been interviewed about it. He's the corresponding author and the PI of the lab. Anyway, vitamin C enriched gelatin supplementation before intermittent activity augments collagen synthesis, 2017, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And here they used 5 grams or 15 grams of gelatin that had, I believe, 50 milligrams or so of vitamin C in it. And they actually showed that 5 grams didn't work. And so 15 grams, they didn't test 10 grams, but in this particular study, 15 grams was the minimal effective dose that was tested. And that should provide something on the order of 5 grams of glycine. So it's fairly similar to what's being used per day to decrease pro-inflammatory cytokines in diabetes, and fairly, middle of range for what was used in that study to benefit blood sugar. And what they showed was that if you took this, let's see, 30, I'm pretty sure they took this a half hour before the exercise. Let me see. Nutritional supplements. They were provided 0, 5, or 15 grams. And it had 48 milligrams of vitamin C with it. they were instructed to consume the beverage as quickly as possible before 1 hour, 1 hour before exercise. Um, and so this is basically, this is on the order of 5 grams of glycine. And what they showed was that the exercise could improve circulation of the blood to the joints. And so the glycine circulating in the body a half hour after consuming it could be brought into the joints to stimulate collagen synthesis by the exercise induced blood flow to the joints. So this is so most of these studies are basically on the order of 5 grams, but they're not combining it. So you could rate, on the one hand, you could raise the question of, what if you took 15 grams of gelatin before exercise, 5 grams of glycine with each meal to stabilize your blood sugar and decrease your pro-inflammatory cytokines, and then took 3 grams before bed. Well, at that point, if you're eating 3 meals a day, you're up to 23 grams of glycine. And none of these studies looked at the safety of that. But this paper, Adjunctive High Dose Glycine in the Treatment of Schizophrenia by Javit et al., um, in the International Journal of Neuropsychopharmacology from December 2001, this paper used 60 grams of glycine a day. And they found antipsychotic benefits of it in schizophrenia. And from what I recall, there weren't serious adverse effects here. So let me just make sure of that. Let's just search this for adverse effects. So all patients completed the study without significant incident. One patient's blood glucose level was found to be elevated above normal limits during the placebo phase. The patient remained in the study, and glucose blood levels were monitored throughout the remainder of the study, and following study completion, EPS and tardive dyskinesia were monitored throughout the study. 8 of the 12 patients had complete side effect data for each treatment phase. No significant interactions of treatment by week within treatment phase were found for BAS, SIS, and AIMS scores. Those scores didn't change significantly. I'm not even sure what these scores are. So EPS. Oh, extrapyramidal symptom. I guess these are basically schizophrenia related symptom scores. Barnes akathisia scale, Simpson Angus scale, abnormal involuntary movement scale. So I'm not familiar with these tests. I can't competently explain them. But it looks like with 60 grams of glycine that they didn't find any serious adverse effects. And so that seems to suggest that you probably could combine these different therapeutic roles of glycine, not worry about it. Although, excuse me, although anecdotally, there are some people who react negatively to glycine. And so I do know, I have a couple consulting clients who have hypersensitivities to lots of things. And for them, glycine causes vasodilation, which, for someone who has headaches and that is an effect of glycine. So, if your glycine levels peak higher than normal in your blood, you could, because glycine can be a vasodilatory agent as well as a calming agent in the CNS, you could get an exaggerated response to that. And if you have migraines where vasodilation is a factor in them, then it could be a trigger for you. So that's a possibility. And then, and so for the people who are hypersensitive to, and in both cases, these are people who are hypersensitive to salicylates and many other things in foods. And they get negative reactions to like a pinch of glycine. So that's sort of not a normal response and not relevant to the question of what dose of glycine is safe. in the sense that you may have an idiosyncratic reaction to glycine that's makes it, where you're vulnerable to an adverse effect, but you know, but it's not because of the dose; it's because of the idiosyncratic effect. And then there are some people that have anecdotally reported glycine dropping their blood sugar, and that kind of makes sense from this study, the metabolic response to ingested glycine, which shows that if you consume it with glucose, it flattens the glucose curve and prevents hyperglycemia. But this paper also showed that if glycine was taken on an empty stomach, it did not do anything to cause hypoglycemia. So it's not a normal response to glycine to get hypoglycemia from it, but I've heard from people who say that they do. So it can happen. Um, all right. So I think I answered this, how much glycine is safe and effective. Basically, minimal effective dose for sleep is 3 grams. Effective dose for other things that have been investigated, including decreasing inflammation, diabetes, stabilizing blood sugar, and in the context of taking collagen before exercise to promote joint health, the equivalent in gelatin of 5 grams of glycine for that, and 5 grams of glycine roughly for those other effects on inflammation and blood sugar. And so we're looking at 3 to 5 grams as a therapeutic dose, but these things are per meal, right? So that this metabolic response to ingested glycine study looked at 1 meal. So presumably, if you wanted to get that effect on a regular basis, you'd have to take 5 grams per meal, and that, to my knowledge, hasn't been studied really or at all. If it has, I don't know about it. But based on 60 grams not having any clear adverse effects in schizophrenics, it would seem like you could take 5 grams per meal and not have a problem with it. And then this is an email that goes out to some people who sign up for an MTHFR protocol. But so I think in here, I think I outlined. Oh, yeah. Okay. So another perspective on this. Well, one other perspective that is on a podcast that I did with a couple other people. So it was Why You Need Glycine, a panel discussion. So if you go here, and this is a very long podcast on glycine with a couple other people, we do talk about some research suggesting that the turnover of collagen is different in different people and can range to the shortage of glycine uh, from what you can make endogenously, mainly from converting serine to glycine, that you fall short in a deficit of glycine about 10 to 60 grams per day. And so that actually remarkably lines up with, pairing a couple of these 3 to 5 gram therapeutic effects with, for the low end, and this 60 grams uh, from the schizophrenia trial on the high end. So the computed metabolic deficit of glycine just remarkably lines up with the window between the sort of minimal and maximal therapeutic dose. But then what I had put in here was, what were our grandparents eating? And so I wrote, we've changed our collective eating habits as a society to move away from nose to tail and towards skinless, boneless chicken breast. Nose to tail diets balance the methionine-rich muscle meats with the glycine-rich bones, cartilage, tendons, and skin. Skinless, boneless chicken breast provides an excess of methionine-rich muscle meats without any of the glycine-rich parts to balance it. The glycine, okay, that's relevant to the protocol, but sorry, I thought I did more math there than I thought I did, but I guess an animal carcass is like 50% collagen-rich tissues, and that's not to say that nose to tail whole animal is exactly mathematically how all our grandparents consumed it. But if you look, I mean, basically you are, it seems like 20 grams of glycine or so is very plausible from like a sort of like eat the whole animal perspective. I guess that's what I'm saying. All right. So over on Instagram, Gorgos19 had asked, what are good dosings and timings for both? 3 grams of glycine, that's correct. 5 grams of salt 1 hour before sleeping. I would start with a gram of salt, or maybe 1 or 2 grams of salt, and then titrate up. I wouldn't go to 5 grams of salt, but that's just my perspective. And there is a study on 3 grams of glycine with sleep. The salt thing was there's a lot of anecdotal support for it, but it's my point was that mechanistically, by stimulating antidiuretic hormone, it should help stop you from peeing, and that should help you sleep better through the night. And I think for that you should just test. I start with like sort of what you might get from a well salted meal, and then work up. And so I did a whole video on how much salt we need, so I'll just defer to that. That just search Master John, how much salt and potassium do we need, and that should come up. But basically like sodium 1500 milligrams to 5 grams is a reasonable window of sodium intake, providing you don't want it to cause edema or high blood pressure or headaches. But if it doesn't do those things, that window is reasonable. And so start on the order of the lower dose, like 1 or 2 grams of salt, and work your way up. That's what I would say. All right. So Rob Bogan asked another question. Does Dr. Masterjohn sometimes mentions that glycine can have the opposite effect? It can keep us awake. This happens to me. It's extreme. I generally sleep okay, but recently supplemented with glycine for a lark and barely slept for 3 days until I figured out what it was. Does anyone understand why this may be? Why would it act as an excitatory neurotransmitter? Any specific mechanisms? Well, I know, and I did a video on it. So I'm pretty sure if you search Master John glycine, keeps you up or something like that, or keeps you awake, you'll find it. But basically, so glycine and GABA both act as inhibitory transmitters by opening chloride channels. All they do is they allow chloride to cross the membrane. That's literally all they do mechanistically. So that's not entirely true. There's other GABA receptors that have like intracellular signaling cascades and stuff, but the main GABA receptor and the main glycine receptor are ion channels, and all those ion channels do is when they open up, because of the attachment of glycine or GABA, they let chloride through. And so inhibiting or activating a neuron is entirely driven by the change in electric charge across the membrane. And so whether you activate or inhibit that neuron will depend entirely on whether the chloride flows in one direction or the other. And so generally speaking, the chloride's going to flow into the cell through that channel. But if all the chloride wound up inside the cell and the concentration's higher inside the cell than outside the cell, and you're not energetically pumping chloride back to the other side of the membrane, then when you open the chloride channel, the chloride's going to come out of the cell, and it's going to do the exact opposite as what it should. And that will convert glycine or GABA into excitatory neurotransmitters. And that actually happens normally during the first 2 weeks of life, where neurogenesis is very important. And so GABA acts as an excitatory neurotransmitter to stimulate neurogenesis in the infant brain. And that's regulated and is supposed to happen that way. but it can also happen pathologically. And so, in certain subsets of epilepsy, for example, it's thought that GABA becomes inverted in its signaling, uh, possibly just from overuse of GABA. So if the neuron's constantly stimulated more than it should be, and GABA's constantly called on to balance glutamate more than it should be, and GABA is constantly acting on that neuron, and there is an energetic deficit to pump the chloride back out of the cell after it comes in, uh, you know, perhaps due to an underlying energy deficit, which might be driving the whole epileptic phenomenon in that person, then GABA will become a pro-epilepsy excitatory neurotransmitter, because chloride's stuck inside the cell. So why would chloride be stuck inside the cell? Well, you can have neuronal damage, and of course, some epilepsy is just driven by physical trauma. Um, so you can have neuronal damage, but I would think the most common reason would be an energy deficit, because it takes energy to pump uh, chloride outside the cell. Um, and so to me, that sounds like low ATP levels more likely, but it could also be low electrolytes. I mean, so certainly if you don't eat enough salt, um, you're not going to have an inflow of chloride, for one thing. But also, you want a balance of salt and potassium, and to a lesser extent, calcium and magnesium, just to facilitate transport of these ions, because a lot of the ion transporters require multiple ions, where you the transport of one is paired to the transport of the other. And so you want a balance of all your electrolytes, a rich balance of them, and you want high ATP levels. But why would your ATP levels be low is a whole Pandora's box. I mean, so that could be uh, diabetes or underlying insulin resistance, adrenal sufficiency, hypothyroidism, inborn errors of metabolism, uh, basically any B vitamin deficiency, iron deficiency, copper deficiency, sulfur deficiency. I mean, can't answer that question as if there's an umbrella answer to it, because pretty much anything, any of those things plus more could be lowering ATP levels. All right, so I'm going to go to live chat in a second, just seeing if there's any glycine specific questions left here. All right, so this person says, I want to thank you, Chris, for all your deep and interesting videos. For this video topic here, I'm a bit surprised the man don't ask the question about the best ratio of which this salt glycine can work. I personally use daily in the late evening around 10 to 20 grams of glycine powder and get nearly good sleep. Wow, 10 to 20 grams. Well, that's more than has been studied for that purpose. Just the pee problem for me at night is most of the problem. Perhaps I can fix it with salt together. Anyway, no surprise that I have a bit of problems with my 1 meal a day nutrition in the evening. Yes, I know not always the best time to eat, but I work on this. Thanks for any ideas with a possible salt intake, especially with a low carb vegan diet, 1 meal a day. I would need more salt than as others think. Thanks for all your work, from Andreas in France. I mean, I don't think it's about the salt to glycine ratio. I think that, try a gram or two of salt, work up to a max of 5,000 milligrams. 5,000 milligrams, 5 grams of sodium. Keep in mind that sodium is, I think it's 40%. Salt is 40% sodium. So let's see, salt molar mass. Salt doesn't have a molar mass, but Google knows what I mean. Sodium molar mass. So sodium doesn't have a molar mass, but Google knows what I mean. So 22.99 divided by, what was this, 58.44. Yeah, 39%. Salt is 39% sodium. So if you're talking about 5 grams of sodium, you're talking about 5 divided by that, which is 12.7 grams of salt. So that's the upper bound of what I would experiment with. The lower bound would be 3 point. Well, oh, interesting. So a gram of salt is, I guess, too small. So, uh, 1,500 milligrams. Well, I mean, actually, I guess 1 gram of sodium, I think, is pretty reasonable place to start, and that's going to be 2.5 grams of table salt. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing and I'm gonna go to the live chat. I'll answer any questions on glycine. So, well, why not answer this? So Jill Eris says, "Are you getting the vaccination?" Well, I mean, I just got over my second case of COVID. It was 10 times less bad as the first time. It was a year and a half later. Um, if it was the Delta variant, then I would estimate that at a year and a half, I still had 20x protection because based on what I've looked at, the Delta variant is about 2 times worse if you control for demographic risk factors. It's not playing out in the real world as 2 times as worse because partly because a lot of people have been vaccinated in the last 6 months, plus a lot of the people that would have died from Delta already died from before or got serious cases from before and are now immune. So, if it was the Delta and it was 10x less bad than the original Wuhan that I got in end of January 2020, then a year and a half later I have 20x protection. God knows what my protection is now. I mean, I basically just got a booster illness, and so you know, I understand that 2 data points don't make a trend, but I only have 2 data points. So if I'm going to try to make a trend, looks like the trajectory is like in another year and a half, I'll get COVID next time and it'll be 100 times less bad than the first time. I mean, I know that's not probable, but it'll probably be less bad. So I would think I have as good protection as I could get from anything. And even if I wanted to, all the data I've seen so far suggests that natural immunity is more effective than vaccine immunity. And vaccine immunity, at least the Pfizer vaccine, is starting to wear off at 6 months after the second dose. So even if I was going to get the vaccine, I don't know why I'd do it now. I just got fresh off my second case of COVID. I should be at like peak immunity right now. So why would I take something that wanes in 6 months as like another booster shot? Um, I mean, it seems like I should, even if I were to consider that, which I'm not really, it would seem the rational thing to do would be to wait 6 months and see like maybe, when I think my natural immunity is starting to wane, if I don't want to get COVID again, uh, you know, then I would add it in. Just seems like a ridiculous timing to get it now. Anyway, Robert Jordan says, is glycine a sugar? No, it is an amino acid. Is it insulinemic? I forget. So let's look at the metabolic response to ingested glycine. I think they looked at insulin here. All right, so glycine response. All right, serum insulin response. So this is open circles are water, closed circles are glucose. Open triangles are roughly 5 grams of glycine alone, and closed triangles are glycine with glucose. So open triangles are glycine alone. It looks like it's slightly insulinemic, so this is zero effect on insulin right here. This is the effect of glycine, and this is the effect of glucose. All right, wait a second. Is that right? Oh, yeah. So 25 grams is glucose alone. And then, closed circles, glucose alone, and closed triangles is glucose plus glycine. So this is glucose up here, and this is glycine, and this is water. So it's slightly insulinemic, but not really. Oh, shoot. I was not sharing my screen. All right. Let me share my screen. So, what happened? All right. So I'll just show that graph one more time. So here is water. Here is glycine alone. And this is glucose with or without glycine. So this is looks like a very minimal insulin spiking effect of glycine by itself. All right, stop share. Johnny Valamere says, any risk of just taking 20 grams of collagen in the morning to balance my methionine and glycine ratio? I don't see why that would be risky. I mean, you're looking at maybe 7 grams glycine in that. I don't see why that would be risky based on what we looked at before. Robert Jordan says, so a vegan diet is going to be deficient in glycine or at least be metabolically expensive to convert nutrients to make it. Well, I mean, on the one hand, a vegan diet is lower in methionine, and methionine raises the demand for glycine. So generally speaking, I think that if you eat a vegan diet and you eat enough protein, which is hard to do, but if you're eating like a gram of, you're not going to hit a gram of protein per pound of body weight, but if you eat like a half a gram of protein per pound of body weight, your methionine glycine balance is probably going to be pretty good on a vegan diet. And so it's really like you want to pair the collagen with your meat protein. That's really where it kicks in, right? So the worst case scenario is skinless, boneless chicken breast. Veganism it's hard to get enough protein on veganism, and it has been shown that vegans tend to run deficient in enough glycine to make glutathione, but that's really because they're inadequate in protein rather than because their methionine and glycine balance is off. So, veganism is definitely not the best from a protein perspective, but from a glycine specific perspective, it is really not the worst thing. So if you could boost the total protein on a vegan diet to something that is adequate for total protein, the glycine doesn't look that bad. It looks pretty bad in someone who's consuming very high methionine. So, the person consuming lots of eggs, dairy, and meat, and fish, and, skinless, boneless chicken breast and egg whites are sort of like, or even, whole egg and whole dairy with no collagen protein. That's the negative outcome. Protein says most individual amino acid supplements and gelatin powders contain heavy metals and processing contaminants. Any approved brands? I don't know. I guess that would be something to look at for Consumer Reports or Environmental Working Group or something like that. I do use I do use Great Lakes. I do think Vital Proteins and Thrive Market seem to have high quality products, but I've never looked at an analysis of the heavy metals across different brands, and so I can't answer that question with any confidence. Jarrett Matta says, have you been doing carnivore? You look like you've lost weight and look good earlier. Earlier, you looked a little bloated like Lane Norton, LOL. I think you said that in my last live video. I have not been doing carnivore. I do eat a diet with plenty of animal protein in it. I've been working out and I did lose a lot of weight. I gained 32 pounds or something of COVID weight. It wasn't really just COVID weight. It was a collision of the worst possible life circumstances all at once. And I lost most of that. So I've lost probably 15 pounds recently, currently losing weight. But yeah, I'm not doing carnivore. Johnny Co says, "What's the reason why if I eat a heavy meal before bed, not the health?" Yeah, I'm just fielding glycine questions in the live chat right now. So it looks like we're at the end of the questions. Actually, Hair Out says, "Usually wake up once to pee midway through the night. Is this an issue with ADH?" I mean, it could be. There is a circadian rhythm in ADH that should stop you from peeing, waking up to pee in the middle of the night. But it's that's not necessarily the only factor. So, but I would look at that first since it does stop you from peeing. All right. Well, it looks like that's it for today. It was great seeing you guys. Hopefully we can do this tomorrow. Take care, guys.